So, I'm not going to spend much time talking about Maryland, although it was a fascinating colony. We just don't have time to cover it in depth. Maryland was the first proprietary colony, meaning privately owned. King Charles the First of England granted a large tract of land north of Virginia to Sir George Calvert, and who was the Lord Baltimore. He named the colony in honor of Queen Henrietta Maria. George Calvert converted to Catholicism in 1625, and he wanted his colony to be a refuge for persecuted Catholics in England. His son, Cecilius, was the one to actually found Maryland in 1634. In the Maryland Charter, the king gave the Calvert family almost dictatorial powers there. So the Calverts did try to recruit only Catholic settlers, but after a couple decades it became populated by a majority of indentured servants who were Protestant. The Calverts technically owned all the land in Maryland and charged what were called quit rents to farmers who were wealthy enough to pay them on large estates. With good access to the sea and land well suited to growing tobacco, Maryland prospered early on. Eventually, the English Civil War and Cromwell dictatorship, something you'd learn more about in Western Civ class, new laws in Maryland limited the Calverts' governmental control. In 1689, during the period of the Glorious Revolution in England, a Protestant militia captain and member of the Maryland Assembly, the Maryland version of the House of Burgesses, named John Coode, led a revolt against what remained of the proprietary Calvert government in Maryland. 2 years later, 1691, Maryland became a regular royal colony, like the others. Maryland's economy and lifestyle looked remarkably like Virginia's. Not much difference. If you went to Maryland in the late 17th century, you would think you were in Virginia for the most part. You would see a very similar plantation style system with a very similar class structure. Wealthy planters, plurality as a small elite, then the plurality of people were indentured servants, and then some slaves. So, what we want to remember about Virginia in particular is how much of a business enterprise it was. Really, in a sense, it was not much different than an internet startup today. Very little emotion was attached to it early on. Virginia was about how much money people could make in as short a time as possible. It wasn't until the 1680s or so, a good 75 years after initial settlement, when Virginia became more stable. After that, the male to female ratio evened out, and people started to consider Virginia a place to build actual permanent settlements, a permanent society that was modeled somewhat on England. Before that, Virginia was this place that was focused on profits, had a really high death rate, had more men than women, spread out, very few towns, very competitive, uh, very unpleasant. So all these characteristics were quite unique for the 17th century, and in a lot of ways, kind of set a tone for the American colonies going forward. Uh, there are some historians that argue that the American colonies and later what became the United States, really its origins in Virginia kind of determined the capitalistic development that happened there in later centuries.